Why would a man 3,000 miles away, in a city he's never left, become the first person arrested in a case about a boy who died on a Mississippi island? Why would federal agents choose a Sacramento apartment over Horn Island itself for their first knock on a door? Why did a state autopsy get finished this week without the victim's own parents being allowed to read a single page of it? And why, out of everyone connected to this story, did a family already under public suspicion respond by putting up their own money for answers? Those questions got real answers this week, and so did several others that had been sitting unresolved for almost a month. Welcome to Case Desk. If you want every confirmed development in this case the moment it breaks, hit that subscribe button now, because this update covers more ground than almost any single week since Nolan disappeared. A quick orientation for anyone catching this case for the first time. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a recent Ocean Springs High School graduate who'd signed to play football in college. On July 4th, he traveled by boat to Horn Island, a barrier island off the Mississippi coast, with a large group of friends spread across multiple vessels. At some point that afternoon, the boat he'd arrived on developed engine trouble and began taking on water. His friends have said he chose to remain on the island, planning to catch a ride back later with someone else, while they returned to the mainland without him. He was reported missing that night, and his body was recovered from the water 2 days later. No cause of death has ever been made public, and no one has been charged in connection with his death. What changed, dramatically, in the past several days is almost everything happening around that unanswered question, on multiple fronts, almost all at once. Start with the arrest, because it's the biggest single development this case has produced since the body was found. It didn't come from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office or from Mississippi State investigators. It came from the FBI's Safe Streets Task Force, a unit built specifically to work threats that cross state lines, and the man they arrested has never set foot on Horn Island in his life. His name is Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarche, 27, of Sacramento, California. Investigators say he spent weeks sending messages to Jackson County Judge Ashley Cole using a Facebook account under the username Yayai962, believing that name kept him anonymous. It didn't. Cole's connection to this story runs through her family. Her stepson, Warren Hudson, was among the friends on the boat with Nolan on July 4th, and as online speculation about that day intensified, Cole became a target. Court documents describe messages beginning July 11th. One told her a package was coming to her office that would, in the sender's words, blow her away when she saw it. Another gave her only seconds, once that package was opened, to ask for forgiveness. He told her he had her email, her phone number, her address, and asked what exactly was going to stop him, adding at one point that not even the FBI could stop what he had planned. He also called numbers connected to her courtroom at 1:27 in the morning, weeks before agents ever knocked on his door. Federal prosecutors charged Dumarche with interstate transmission of a threatening communication, a felony that carries up to 5 years in prison, a fine as high as $250,000, and 3 years of supervised release. That statute exists specifically for threats sent across state lines through channels like the internet, which is exactly why a case rooted in Mississippi produced a federal charge against a man in California. The indictment states he knowingly and willfully transmitted a communication threatening to kill a sitting judge. Here's how agents found him. He believed a screen name put real distance between himself and consequences. Investigators traced the Facebook account to the email used to register it, pulled IP address history from that email, identified a phone number from those addresses, and confirmed a Sacramento street address from the phone number. Every step in that chain existed because he had, at some point, logged in or sent something using ordinary internet infrastructure that quietly keeps a record. That matters well beyond one man in California. The same categories of evidence, email trails, IP logs, phone records, exist for anyone who has threatened someone connected to this case, accessed an account that wasn't theirs, or carried a phone that was generating location data near Horn Island on July 4th. Every Snapchat account active on the island that day created server-side records the moment someone logged in or sent a message. And none of that disappears because an app gets deleted later or a chat gets cleared. This arrest was a public demonstration of what federal digital forensics can do once it's pointed at a specific investigation. And anyone who assumed their own activity connected to this case stayed private just watched that assumption fail. In public, on a national scale. Cole posted screenshots of the threats to her own Facebook page days before Dumarche's arrest went public, saying she wouldn't elaborate further to the media on the facts of July 4th. That wasn't the first time her public statements had drawn scrutiny. An earlier post, in which she identified herself as a sitting judge while defending her stepson, had already prompted an ethics complaint filed with Mississippi's Commission on Judicial Performance, adding legal scrutiny of her own on top of the threats she was receiving. She isn't the only person connected to this case describing harassment. Nolan's own mother, Christine Wansley, has said her family has faced hostile calls, harassing mail, and a wave of negative reviews aimed at her professional page. Harassment attorney Ben Crump called sick and evil at a press conference this week. That pattern, real people absorbing real consequences for things only loosely connected to what actually happened to Nolan, shows up again in the case of someone who has never been accused of anything by any agency with the authority to make an accusation. Bart Edmiston Jr. is 21, a punter at the University of Wyoming, and he played football alongside Nolan at Ocean Springs High School. He was on Horn Island on July 4th, on a separate boat from Nolan's group. According to a statement from his family, when Nolan's boat began taking on water, Edmiston boarded it, removed a plug from the hull to help drain it, and briefly towed it so the water could clear before returning to his own boat. His family says he sat for interviews, answered every question, handed over his phone for inspection, and allowed his boat and its GPS data to be examined, all without a warrant or an attorney present. Cooperation his family has pointed to directly as evidence he has nothing to hide. No agency has ever named him a suspect. Online speculation attached to him anyway, out of a misidentified old photograph, and claims that an enhanced version of the original towing company's distress call contains his name somewhere in the background noise. His attorney, Russell Latino, addressed this on News Nation, describing two tragedies playing out at once: Nolan's death and what public speculation has done to his own client without a warrant or a single formal accusation from anyone in law enforcement.
An alleged enhanced audio of the CTO call that purports to have a background conversation that is suggested sounds like people explaining the murder of Nolan. The word Bart is in there, and I know real people with real platforms are pointing the finger at your client.
Yeah, so we don't see any legitimacy in a doctored transcript or a doctored audio that comes with a transcript, which is a nice psychological sort of game that people play with garbled audio. So yeah, people are just fabricating things wildly. And the consequence of that is that you've got people who are in legitimate fear for their lives. Our viewpoint is not, we can't stop the entire internet. My client's role was to help drain water off of a boat that reported it being in distress. There were 20 plus people separated between those two boats. All of them saw what he did. All of them saw what did and didn't happen. There were two credible witnesses at least that saw Nolan Wells on Horn Island an hour and a half after those two boats left.
Latino called the enhanced audio doctored and its transcript a psychological game played with garbled sound. That's his characterization, and it serves his client's interests. A retired FBI agent who separately reviewed the original, unenhanced recording said publicly he heard nothing sinister in it at all, describing an ordinary, chaotic scene of teenagers dealing with a sinking boat on a busy holiday weekend. Neither side of that argument has been settled by any forensic analysis released to the public, and both versions currently exist side by side, unresolved. But Latino also made two claims that go further than characterization. First, he said more than 20 people were spread across the two boats near Horn Island during the window when the distress call went out, and that his client had turned over a full witness list to investigators without being asked twice. A statement from Edmiston's family echoes that number. That's a meaningfully higher figure than most public reporting has established for that specific stretch of water during that specific window, and it matters for a simple reason. A case resting on the accounts of 3 or 4 friends is fragile in a way a case resting on 20 separate witnesses isn't. If it holds up, that's 20 separate accounts of what happened during that window, 20 phones that may have generated location data, and 20 people who can be compelled to testify under oath if this reaches a grand jury. Second, Latino said at least 2 credible witnesses saw Nolan alive on Horn Island roughly an hour and a half after both boats had already left. Treat that claim for what it is. Not an independently confirmed fact from investigators, but a statement from the attorney representing someone whose legal interest is served by placing his client nowhere near the island when whatever happened to Nolan happened. It's also now on the public record, made on national television by a named attorney representing a named client. The primary boat left around 4:30 that afternoon. If Nolan was seen alive, closer to 6, everything that happened to him occurred in a window when neither boat group was near him, which doesn't clear anyone by itself, but does give investigators a specific window to work backward from, checking footage, phone records, and accounts from everyone else who was on that island that afternoon. If those two witnesses can eventually be corroborated against boat GPS data already made public, the entire working timeline of this case moves, and moves in a direction nobody had previously placed on the record. Now to the development that's received far less attention than either of those, even though it may matter more than both combined. Mississippi State Autopsy, conducted just 3 days after Nolan's body was recovered, is finished. The results are being kept private, while the district attorney prepares to present them to a grand jury, and neither Ben Crump nor Nolan's own parents have seen them. The people fighting loudest for answers about their son's death haven't been shown what the state's own examination actually found. That's not a paperwork detail. It's the exact tension that's driven nearly everything this family has done publicly since July 4th. Every press conference and every independent expert exists because the official investigation hasn't told them what it found. Prosecutors say the silence protects the grand jury process and applies to every unnatural death in the county, regardless of public attention or the size of the audience watching. The family experiences that same silence as being shut out entirely. Both can be true at once. A prosecutor following standard procedure and a grieving family experiencing that procedure as opacity aren't contradictory positions. They're two vantage points on the same closed door, and now that the report is finished, one fewer obstacle stands between this investigation and a grand jury actually weighing whether anyone can be charged. Here's why that report matters so much next to the independent autopsy already public. Dr. Roger Mitchell, the pathologist Nolan's family retained, examined his body on July 10th and found an area of red discoloration roughly 12 by 8 inches in the soft tissue at the back of his head, cause undetermined. He found no fractures and no obvious lacerations elsewhere, though decomposition could have obscured other injuries. He listed cause and manner of death as undetermined, and said he couldn't rule out neck injury because the structures that would show it, the trachea, the surrounding cartilage, the hyoid bone, simply weren't present in the body when it reached him. The state's examiners had those structures. They examined Nolan just 3 days after recovery, when decomposition was far less advanced. That means the sealed report likely answers nearly every question Mitchell's findings left open. Was there water in the airway consistent with drowning? Was there trauma to the neck structures Mitchell never received? Was there bleeding inside the skull? What did the stomach contents show? What does toxicology show? Every one of those questions almost certainly has a documented answer sitting in a file nobody outside a small circle of officials has read. Crump has formally requested that Mitchell be given access to those findings and photographs, and be present when this case reaches a grand jury. Whether that's granted decides whether jurors hear one official account of what Nolan's body showed, or two independent readings weighed against each other directly, and that single decision could shape how the rest of this case unfolds more than almost anything else currently in motion. Now to something that deserves more attention than it's gotten, because of who did it and what it signals. Warren Hudson's father, Benjamin Hudson, announced a $50,000 reward this week for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Nolan's death. Read that twice. A father whose own son was on that boat, whose own family has faced threats serious enough to draw a federal charge, just put up his own money for accountability in a case some corners of the internet have implied his family wants buried. That is not the posture of a family trying to suppress what happened on Horn Island. It's a family putting real financial weight behind the same outcome Nolan's own parents have been fighting for since July. Whether that reward reflects genuine commitment or a strategic show of cooperation under scrutiny is something only time and this investigation's findings can answer, and both explanations can sit alongside each other without contradiction. What it does concretely is add $50,000 to the $125,000 already pledged by Reverend Al Sharpton, Tyler Perry, and Terrell Owens, pushing the total reward pool toward $200,000, a figure substantial enough to change the calculation for anyone sitting on real information about what happened that afternoon. The defamation threat from Latino also got a direct response this week, from Crump himself, at the National Urban League's convention in Nashville. Asked about it by a reporter, Crump didn't hedge. "It is a distraction," he said. "We are not distracted by it at all. It is about getting to the truth. That is what we want, and that is what we are focused on. We have not done anything other than ask questions to get to the truth." He went further, saying the accusation didn't deserve a response and carried no dignity given that his clients were standing up for a child who had died. "This is an old story," he said. "We fight for justice, and someone suggests all we want is publicity." He closed simply, "We will not be distracted." That exchange signals something beyond legal posturing on either side. The audio review of the original distress call is still underway. The oceanic engineering analysis of tidal conditions near where Nolan's body was found is still in progress. The joint phone inspection with the FBI present is still being coordinated. None of those threads have slowed because of a lawsuit threat, and Crump's response confirms none of them will. Put every confirmed thread from this week side by side, and this case is moving on, more simultaneous fronts than at any point since Nolan's body was recovered at the northwestern tip of Horn Island. A federal arrest, unconnected to the death itself, but demonstrating real digital reach. A completed state autopsy still sealed from the people who need it most. A contested but specific timeline now on the public record from an opposing attorney. A reward pool approaching $200,000. A legal team publicly refusing to be slowed by a defamation threat. None of that, on its own, answers what happened to Nolan Wells. Together, it looks less like a case going cold and more like an investigation narrowing on multiple fronts at once, whether or not any single piece feels decisive by itself. A month ago, this case was defined mostly by silence, a missing teenager, a body recovered, and very little explanation in between. This week alone produced a federal indictment, a completed autopsy, a contested timeline, and a reward pool that's nearly doubled. That pace, on its own, is worth noticing regardless of what any individual thread eventually proves. Before we close, subscribe to Case Desk and hit like on this video, because based on how fast this case has been moving, the next real break could land any day. But we're not ending on process tonight, because Nolan's mother didn't either, and after everything covered in this update, her words are the ones actually worth carrying with you. At that same convention in Nashville, Christine Wansley stood in front of a room of strangers and said something that cuts through every arrest, every reward, and every expert consultation and gets to what this case has actually been about the entire time. "It has been 27 days since we have been able to talk to our son, to hug him, to tell him we love him," she said. "This has been the most difficult time we have ever had." Then she described who he was, in words worth hearing exactly as she said them. Nolan was a God-fearing, God-loving child. He loved everyone. He was the person who would just make you feel comfortable just being in his space. He was never one to exclude. He always wanted everyone to be happy, to feel good, to have purpose. He would lift anyone up. It didn't even matter if he didn't know you. If you took that moment to just tell him a little bit about yourself, what you wanted to do with your life, right then and there, Nolan would be your biggest cheerleader. Elmore Wansley stood up after her and said what only a father processing this kind of loss can say. "I pretty much was raised up like a lot of you. I didn't have a lot, but I always said I wanted to give my children more than what I had. And I think me and my wife, we did that. We raised Nolan to love everyone, be kind to everyone, because it was just the right thing to do." Those are the words of a man waking up every morning to what he's called the hardest challenge of his life, trying to make sense of losing a son he raised to be exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. He was 18 years old. A man in California now faces federal prison time for threatening a family connected to this case. A state autopsy is finished and still sealed from the family who needs it most. 2 contested witnesses place him alive an hour and a half later than anyone previously said on record. A reward pool nearing $200,000 is waiting on one person who hasn't yet found the courage to come forward. "Do for Nolan what he would have done for you," his mother said in Nashville. And that's the question sitting in front of everyone who was on that island on July 4th and hasn't told the full truth about what they saw. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe on Case Desk so you're here the moment any of these threads actually break, because something in this case is moving right now, faster than it has in weeks. We'll bring you what's confirmed the moment it's confirmed, not a moment before. We'll talk to you very soon.